I want to get on to something else now, which is about kind of like an alternative canon with regards to Galadriel, actually, and her time spent in Eregion. So we know now that Tolkien changed his mind a lot on things over the period of his life, and we've covered that many times in different episodes. But from other writings, and mainly from Unfinished Tales, there's another version of events around the origin of Eregion, which states that in the year 750, the city of Ostinethil was established by Galadriel and Celebrimbor. So they actually established it together, and it was under the rule of Queen Galadriel, along with her husband Celeborn. So I suppose it was like queen and king. But she actually, in this version, she actually ruled Eregion for 600 years. And then it states that in the year 1350, so that's 600 years after 750 of its establishment, it says that there was a coup. And that at that point, then Celebrimbor became the ruler. Now, this is actually really cool, and it's really an interesting turn of events, because if we look at those dates, we also know that Sauron, under the form of Anatar, he came to Eregion in the year 1200. Now, it's 150 years before this coup. And so he befriended Celebrimbor along with the Gwaithí Myrdain, who I'll speak about in a moment. And he gained their trust and started his manipulation and started kind of, these little rumors and whispers. So also we know elves, Dave. We know elves. We know that they're kind of like the Ents in that they're not very hasty. They take a bit of time to do anything. So when you see Anatar arriving, we shouldn't expect any big moves to happen within the first few years. He's going to take his time. He's going to lay down the groundwork, get to know some people, feel it out. But we always know from all the different versions that basically when he arrived, and even before he arrived, Galadriel kind of had this sense that Sauron was re-emerging. And then we also know that when Anatar first came on the scene, she immediately didn't trust him. And we know that he tried to get in there in the good books with Gil-galad and other people and Elrond, and lots of them didn't trust him. And they didn't really have a reason for it, and they weren't able to explain to other elves, don't trust him because he's Sauron, because they didn't know that. They just didn't like him. So that was the case here as well. So we can see that. So Galadriel outwardly kind of distrusted him, and he kind of just took it all on the chin, and he was very gracious back to her. And kind of outwardly, you kind of could be thinking, why is she being so cruel to this lovely, wonderful man who is, or sorry, not man, this wonderful elf who's coming to help us with his amazing smithing skills. And so that's what kind of was started at this time in the year 1200. And then so it would seem that Sauron was the one who started to sow these seeds of doubt in the minds of Celebrimbor and all of the other important elves, and kind of given them a reason to think that Galadriel was maybe not fit to rule as queen, and maybe for them to not really to revolt and to kind of overthrow her or anything, but maybe to, not vote for her in the next election. Basically.
Well, it's just funny because it's exactly... Well, it's not exactly, but it's almost identical to the same storyline that happens in Numenor. Now, obviously, Anatar or Sauron wasn't really there. He was communicating with Pharazôn, and he got him to kind of have a coup against Miriel. And I don't know if you're going to get into it. You'll probably tell me now, but I wonder, is that part of the reason why Tolkien scrapped this version of the story? Because... maybe it was because it was too similar to something that happened on the island of Numenor.
Well, he didn't scrap it, actually, and it was, it has been published in Unfinished Tales. Now, obviously, Unfinished Tales was published by Christopher Tolkien.
But that's like a what-if version,
Yeah, but Joe, and I didn't really want to bring this up, but I watched a very, very interesting video of the Tolkien professor about a week ago, and he was talking about canon. And canon in Lord of the Rings, and kind of saying,
I think I saw that video.
What is canon? And it was really, really well explained that he said lots of people will state that canon is the published works by the author, and that's what you have to go by. And he was kind of saying how if you know anything about how publishing works, who makes the decision on what is and what is not published? It's not the author, it's the publisher. And so there's maybe loads of things that Tolkien wanted to be published and what Tolkien considered to be the correct story, but because of one publisher's opinion, those things didn't get published. So maybe what we're all saying, this is the exact correct canon of Lord of the Rings, or of this whole world, and even though Tolkien has spent his entire life building it, and he considered something else, because one publisher was like, actually, I think this might make for a better book, we should publish this one instead. That could be the cause of, so I think there is room for interpretation there, and there is a little bit of wiggle room. And if you can see that Tolkien has written something at one point anywhere, and it wasn't published as maybe what you would consider the correct canon, you could still make an argument for some of these things, because you could say, well, look, Tolkien himself made these thoughts, even if it was published in a letter or whatever. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. This is maybe a secondary thing, or as I said at the beginning, it's an alternative. But I thought that was quite interesting, so I just thought I might mention it there. But so going on with this anyway, basically, it seems that either way, after 150 years of Annatar being in Eregion, Celebrimbor succeeds Galadriel, and then she takes her daughter Celebrian, and they leave Eregion, and they pass through the mines of Moria, or Khazad-dûm at that point, and upon coming out the other side, they find this lovely area, and they establish lothlorien on the other side of Khazad-dûm. So that's after she was kind of removed from the throne. But I do have a quick question for you now, and that is, I told you that Galadriel and her daughter Celebrian are the ones who leave. Celeborn decided to stay and to not travel to Lothlorien with his wife and daughter. He instead opted to stay in Eregion, where he no longer had any power, and people kind of probably maybe spoke badly about him behind his back. So why didn't he leave? Why did he choose to stay? Any idea?
Is it possibly because he listened to his wife, and also had the suspected doubt of this Lord Annatar that was coming in, pulling the strings, and he wanted to keep an eye on him and make sure that he didn't completely turn Celebrimbor or take over the city himself? Was it something to do with Annatar?
Nothing to do with that at all. No, it's far more petty than that.
Oh, is it? It's far more petty.
What was the route that Galadriel and her daughter took?
Oh, it's because he didn't want to go through the passageway made by dwarves. So he didn't want to interact with dwarves.
Exactly. He just liked the dwarves so much that he refused to pass through Moria to go to Lothlorien. So
is that part of the same canon, or is that part of?
No, sorry. This is we're now back on track with the regular canon, because in the regular one it was also the same thing, that when Galadriel left before she established Lothlorien, they travelled, her and Celebrian travelled through Lothlorien.
I didn't know he was such a racist.
Well, now we should remember also Celeborn was a prince of Doriath, and this is probably that's probably one of the reasons why he didn't do it. I love just these little stupid things that Tolkien just included. He's like, well, but he's the prince of Doriath, so that means that the fall of Doriath was probably still weighing heavily on Celeborn at the time. And
it's in his lifetime, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, so he's kind of going, I remember that a couple of weeks ago, basically. For him, it felt like that. So people who don't know, fall of Doriath is when it's kind of what kicked off the whole hatred of the elves and dwarves, and it was the whole thing
with the Noglamir necklace.
The king, yeah, exactly. So there was this necklace made of these beautiful jewels, and then the king of the elves got this Silmaril, and he wanted to have the Silmaril and the elves, and the jewels all bandied together, so he could have this one epic necklace. And he employed the dwarves to combine these things and make it for him, and they made it, and then they fell in love with it, didn't want to give it back to him. He came over on his own. He insulted them, and then they just killed him. And then the elves came and killed the dwarves, and the dwarves killed them back. And
then they all lied to each other. The dwarves were like, it was the elves that came after us and killed. And vice versa.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the first domino, I suppose, that kind of kicked off the whole hatred between the elves and the dwarves. So that was probably one of the reasons why Celeborn decided, he was like, I'm not going to go through there. I'm going to stay here. So there you go.
Catch an eagle later.
Yeah, exactly.